Hello, this is Enlight Mike, and this is Music Theory from the Beginning, Episode 1. One of the things I've noticed about music theory is it seems circular. There doesn't seem to be a beginning. So music theory seems to start in the middle a lot of times, but it turns out there is a beginning. It's not covered in basic music theory because it's considered deep music theory. For me, it was the foundation that gave meaning to all the rest of music theory. Before I say what the beginning is, I just want to say that basic music theory is a language that allows us to discuss music. Once we have the definitions of these musical terms, we can easily talk about the music we hear, play, and create. So, in this video series, we will focus on the definitions needed to be able to discuss our music, how we can add greater variety to our songwriting and playing, and how we can move around the fretboard more easily. We won't talk much about actual theory because we want only what will benefit us in playing and making music. Now, let's jump right in. What is the foundation or beginning of music theory? It's called an octave. The intuitive, non-scientific way to define an octave is two different notes that sound the same or that seem to blend together, becoming one tone. A. The next octave higher. They sound very similar. They're obviously two tones, two different tones. But when played together, now, to understand this, we need to know about overtones. Pure tones, tones that have no overtones, are extremely rare in nature. So when we play the A note, it includes multiples of the fundamental tone called overtones. The fundamental tone is the lowest and has the lowest number of cycles per second, called hertz. Now, it's not important to understand the scientific and mathematical stuff that relates to tones, but this information will help us to understand the reasons why music theory is set up the way it is. So, let's look at some of these overtones. This is the overtone chart, and you can see on the first line when I play the open fifth string, the A note is at 110 hertz, which is standard guitar tuning. The first thing to notice is that when I play that low A note, it will include higher octaves in its overtone. An octave is always two times the starting tone. So if we started at 110 hertz, the octaves would be 220, 440, 880, etc. 110, 220, 440, 880 on the guitar. The first overtone, now of course it goes higher, but not on the guitar. The first overtone is two times the fundamental and is the same as the first octave, which I played here. So that's why the A note, along with its octave, sounds like the two tones blend into one another. Both strings are creating a 220 hertz A note. That note already includes that note. This phenomenon was noticed by people long before we knew anything about frequencies. That's why the octave is the foundation of not only Western music, but a number of other music systems in the world. Let's take a quick look at a few of the other overtones. We will get back to the importance of these, but let's just notice for now the second overtone is three times the fundamental at 330 hertz, and it's an E note. The third overtone is four times the fundamental at 440 hertz and is the second octave and is another A note. The fourth overtone is five times the fundamental at 550 hertz and is a C sharp note. Notice that we have the first two octaves in the first three overtones. Also notice that we have the E note and the C sharp note in the first four overtones. This will become important later. I will mention this. So let's now see how the octave helps us to make sense of music theory and how these overtones play a part. Between our fundamental and its octave, we find 6 other tones that have fairly simple relationships with the fundamental, therefore sounding pleasing. Let me show you this chart. These are the simple ratios in order of most pleasing to most discordant in a major key. The 2 numbers represent 2 notes we are playing together. One of the notes is always the fundamental. Again, it is unimportant to understand the ratios. Just notice that the simpler the ratio, the more pleasing the tone. The first line is comparing the fundamental note to itself and is the most consonant. Beside the ratio, we have the name of the interval, or the distance between the 2 notes. There are more intervals than just these found in the major key. Understanding intervals is the secret to making music theory simple to understand and to remember. The bottom half of our chart shows an example of these ratios using the major key of the key of C major. Notice that C is the fundamental note and is always played with another note. And notice that the ratios are also shown as decimal points. But if numbers aren't your thing, don't let this bother you. None of the math will need to be remembered or even understood. Now, let's look at these same intervals in the key of A and play them on the guitar. The A with itself, the fundamental. The A with its first octave. The A with its perfect fifth. The A with its perfect fourth. The A with its major third. The A with its major sixth. The A with its major second. Now, what I'd like to point out here is the next one I'm going to play is the A with its major seventh. Now, that's up. We always go up in music. Here is the A with its major seventh right below it. Music theory talks about, whenever we talk about notes, we don't always have to put the root note at the bottom. And we'll get into that later. But music theory assumes that, and we will talk more about this as we get more into intervals, that the root note is the bottom. Okay, so moving on. Not only was the octave identified by people long before our modern scientific understanding, but also these 8 notes and their simple relationships were known. The reason is because they create a relatively stable, harmonious sound when played with the fundamental. These 8 notes are where the term octave comes from. the Latin word for 8 is octa, octo. So notice you have the fundamental, you have its octave, and you have 6 notes in between. So even though in the major scale we talk about 7 notes, it's never really 7 notes. To repeat the starting note creates your octave. So now we're going to see even more why the octave is so important. We're going to build the complete 12-note musical scale. Watch this. All right. The 7 spaces between our 8 notes are called intervals, and they are not even. This creates what we call the major scale formula. Whole, whole, half. Whole, 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 half. Immediately. At least for me and many others, this causes confusion. Why? Why whole? Whole what? Why half? Whole. We call it a whole step and a half step. There is an historical reason why we are doing something as silly as counting in halves. But this is one of the reasons why music theory can seem so stupidly complicated. So let's try counting this different. We can count this as two half steps and 1 half step. Now we still want to call it a half step because the whole idea of music theory is to be able to talk about music with others, and since that's what they're called, half steps or semitones, we need to stick to that terminology. But we don't have to say to ourselves whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. We can say 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1. Now, if you will follow me here, you will see how all of a sudden everything opens up. If we break those 5 whole steps into half steps, that makes 10 half steps. Plus, we already had 2 half steps, 2 single half steps. So that equals a total of 12 half steps. 2 and 2 is 4, and 1 is 5, and 2 is 7, and 2 is 9, and 2 more is 11, and 1 is 12. That's how many spaces we have between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 notes. The A is repeated. We have 12 notes and 12 spaces. Very important to understand that, and then everything else opens up from there. So we have 12 tones plus our octave, 12 notes. So we want to remember 2-2-1, 2-2-2-1 as our major scale formula. So this is what's important to understand from here. Let's just review. An octave is a higher note that is so consonant that it sounds like the same note. And this is the reason it is the basis of music theory. There are 6 tones between the fundamental and the octave that harmonize with the fundamental, giving us 8 tones that we can use together to create songs. These 8 tones give us the name of the octave and give us the major formula. We can state this formula as 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1 half steps. When we break this down, we have 12 half steps and 12 notes. Using the number 12 instead of 7 will allow us to understand music theory like you've never seen or heard before. The magic will begin in the next episode. I am going to stop here, but I will include an extra that goes along with episode 1.